Hi, my name is Martin Perhiniak. Welcome to PSD Taz Plus. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you the advantages of Camera Raw editing and most of the useful options that you have in the Adobe Camera Raw engine. First of all, we need to know what's the difference between a JPEG and a Camera Raw file. So for that, I'm going to show you two examples. I select a JPEG and the Camera Raw version of the same image. You can create with one exposure two different file formats on most of the DSLR cameras if you choose the option to save into two different file formats. And that's what I have here. So the same image with a JPEG and a Camera Raw file. I'm going to press Ctrl or Command R to open the two selected images in the Adobe Camera Raw from Adobe Bridge. And then here we can see I have the JPEG and the Camera Raw file selected. I can select both of them at the same time if I use Command or Control clicking on the images, or just simply using the Select All button. And then here in the basic panel, we can start doing our edits. So let me just start increasing the fill light first, which will increase the brightness of the shadow area in the image. Then I do the same thing with the highlights, so I increase recovery, and that will darken the highlights. If I press P, I can see before and after. That's using the preview here on the bottom. That's also the same using the preview here on the top. I usually use the keyboard shortcuts. So you can also see the histogram. This was before and after here on the top right, before and after. And on the image we can see it's much better now. But let's just see now the other image which was also selected, the JPEG image. This is before and after. So using the same adjustments, you can see that with the JPEG image we have a very bad image still, while with the Camera Raw file we could completely restore all the lost information in the underexposed dark shadows. And even in the highlights we have more color information after our edits. The fill light and recovery options are very similar to shadow highlights in Photoshop, and of course it makes a really nice detail on the image, so we can see all the details. But because the image was very underexposed, we still have a bit of noise in the image. But that's again something we can get rid of here in Camera Raw. But for now, this is all what I wanted to show you. Still, this photograph obviously is not something that I would use because it was very, very underexposed. So it's a bad image, but it's a good example to see the difference between the JPEG and the Camera Raw formats. Now I click on Done to accept these changes, and I show you another great example with this photograph. Again, I use Ctrl or Command R to open both of them at the same time, and again I have the Camera Raw and the JPEG files for this image. And let me just use a tool now called the White Balance tool from the top, and click here on the background on the door. Now, based on the white background, the Camera Raw could completely restore the original colors, so we could get rid of the color cast in the image. So it was before and this is after. And let's just see the JPEG image now. It's using the same adjustments, so this was before and after, but we can tell that between the JPEG and the Camera Raw, that's a huge difference on the colors. The main reason for this is that the JPEG image can store much less color than the Camera Raw file, but the only disadvantage to a Camera Raw file is the file size. So because it stores more color information, the file size is usually 10 times more than a JPEG file. But I think that shouldn't stop you using Camera Raw files, because you have much more flexibility and much more control over the exposure, the colors, and all the details in your images. And that's really important, because when you work with digital images, you want to be able to store as much information as possible when you take the pictures. So white balance and changing the exposure are great examples. And now if I select these two images, or maybe all four of them, and I press Command or Control B, also here in Camera Raw, we can see a preview or a review of these four images. So again, on the left, far left, we have JPEG, next to it the Camera Raw, and then JPEG, Camera Raw. So huge difference, and you can see that using Camera Raw files are really much better than working with the compressed JPEG files. But now that we know the differences and the advantages, we can see how to work in Camera Raw editing. As you can see, I use Adobe Bridge to open images, mainly because Bridge is a great way to see all your images in a folder and to preview them, and even to see the changes that you apply to images in Camera Raw. If I have a Camera Raw file, I can just simply double click on it and it opens it up automatically in Adobe Camera Raw, which is also something like a sidecar application to Photoshop together with Bridge. And let me just do the usual stuff first, increasing fill light and recovery to compensate the bad exposure on this photograph of mine. But whenever you increase fill light and recovery, you should also increase blacks a bit just to compensate the contrast in the image. And maybe you can also use clarity to compensate for that. Okay, clarity will increase contrast and even sharpness in your image. You can even use vibrance if you want to pump up the colors a bit, something like that. And then we can use a tool called the straighten tool, and we can just simply use this vertical line of the big pen to straighten this photograph and then press enter. Now, the great thing with Camera Raw files is that all the edits that you do are completely non-destructive. So you don't need to save images, you don't need to do anything like that. All your changes are completely stored non-destructively. So even if I go back to the crop tool, after clicking on done, I accept the changes and I double click again on the image and I go back to the crop tool, you can see that we still have all the cropped out details. And if I feel that the straightening is not good, I can always click and change my crop and make some edits. So all the cropped out areas are still available and we can still change all the options that we use here on the basic tab. Another great thing is that you can open the image in Photoshop after you made your changes. If you just simply click on open image, it will open it up in Photoshop as a JPEG image. So it just converts it into a JPEG and opens it up in Photoshop. But if you hold down Shift and click on open image, the button automatically turns to open object, which means you will open up the image as a smart object in Photoshop. So it will create a smart object here, which is an embedded version of the Camera Raw file. So if you start making your edits here in Photoshop using the clone stamp tool, add text, adding other layers with blend modes, so all the stuff that you usually do in Photoshop, you can still go back whenever you want to the original Camera Raw file edits by double clicking on the thumbnail of the smart object. So if I double click on it, I just quickly go back to my edits here and I can make changes, and if I click on OK, I will go back to Photoshop. So it's an integrated workflow between Camera Raw and Photoshop. That's a really useful thing to bear in mind. So let me just go back to Bridge. And I show you another great thing what you can do in Camera Raw. It's called selective color editing, or I call it selective color editing. If we go to another panel, it's called the HSL grayscale panel. And here if you select saturation and then choose this tool called the targeted adjustment tool, keyboard shortcut is T, letter T. So with that you can click on a part of the image and drag it down or upward, up and down. If you drag it down, you can remove the selected color. If you drag it up, you can increase the intensity of the selected color. What I would like to do here, just to increase the interest on this image, or put the emphasis on the bridge, I just removed all the colors from the background by clicking and dragging down first the trees, then the sky, then the building, and then I click and drag on the bridge to increase the reds in the image. So let's just see before and after. You can see we got rid of all the distracting colors from the background, and that made a much better composition. What we can also use is the basic panel, still increasing maybe the clarity just to add even more drama to the image. And then I click on done. So that's a really easy way to turn your images into a more artistic image, and without using any selections or masking or adjustment layers. We could do that really quickly in Camera RAW. And also the great thing is that if you want to switch back to the original image, let me just do this that with the JPEG version here. If I want to switch back to the original image, even on a JPEG file, all our edits are saved non-destructively. So we can right click on it and go to develop settings and just simply choose clear settings. And that will turn back to the original Camera RAW defaults, or in this case the JPEG image. So you don't need to store several versions of the same image, even if it's just a JPEG image. You can use Camera RAW edits and store them non-destructively together with a JPEG file, because all these edits are only saved in the metadata of the image. Let me show you another quick example with the same selective color changes. But first, on this image, I would like to also get rid of these spots, the sensor dust. The reason why I have these spots on my photographs is because I had some dust in the sensor of the camera behind the lens. So to be able to get rid of this one, I'm going to use the spot removal tool. Keyboard shortcut is B. And then I simply just click in the middle of the dust, drag it out, and it automatically uses a reference to hide this detail. And then I just simply click on the other one. I use Command 0 to zoom out and fit to screen, or you can use Control 0 on PC, and I do the same thing on these other parts where I can see this the dust on the image. So now I removed all of them. And again, this is completely non-destructive. We can always clear all of them or just press backspace to delete them one by one. And then I switch to the hand tool just to see all the panels here on the right. And then I use again the HSL panel with the saturation tab opened and the targeted adjustment tool. And then I remove all green colors from the image and I click and drag the blue colors up to increase the intensity of the blue. So this is again a really fast and easy change on the image, which will make a much nicer composition and a more interesting artistic effect. So that's just another example for the same effect. But let's just see another thing now. It's called the graduated filter. Now, with the graduated filter, you can again add more artistic feel to your images, but it's up to you how you use them. Again, it's a great way, without making selections, you can make edits on your images and you won't see the edges of the edits. This option in Camera RAW, the graduated filter, is a local adjustment. So when you select it, you can click and drag on the image and define a gradient. The start point is the green one, the end point is the red one, and between the two there is a fade or a gradual fade. So this is the most intense, your changes are the most intense on the green spot. Okay. Once you have a gradient, then you can use the graduated filter panel here on the right to make your changes. Here you can add, for example, or increase the exposure or decrease the exposure. Now in this case I would like to decrease it. By the way, if you double click on any of the arrows here on the right, on all the panels in Camera Raw, you can always set them back to 0 or their original number. So let me just darken the sky by reducing exposure, but then I click on the color rectangle and I add also a color to the sky, like this one. This is something that you can sometimes see during sunset. It looks a bit surreal, but still I think it makes the whole image better and more interesting. It adds the drama to the image. And then if I want to, I can even add another graduated filter by clicking on New here on the right. And then I'm going to create another gradient at the bottom. But in this case, I would like to increase the exposure. So instead of darkening, I would like to brighten the river and change the color from orange to a bright blue color. Something like this. Okay, maybe a little bit more saturated color. Yeah, something like that one. So let's just see before and after using the graduated filters. You can see we added these colors and it made the whole image even more interesting. It was a good image to start with, but using the graduated filters, we made an even nicer photograph. And, let's just go to the next example. So I open this image up, and another great thing in Camera Raw edits is the lens correction options. If I go to lens corrections, here you can see we have the manual tab where we can do manual transform options or manually getting rid of the distortion caused by the lens, and also other lens problems like chromatic aberration or lens vignetting. But the great thing, and that's what I really like, is using automatic lens correction by choosing profile and enabling the lens corrections like this. And let's just see before and after. So again, before and after. And the changes, the automatic changes, are based on the lens that I used, which was stored in the metadata for this file. So Camera Raw could find my lens, and based on the lens, it automatically used the adjustment for the distortion caused by the lens. I think this is a great option. And also on this image, we can get rid of the spots by using the spot removal tool. I just quickly click and drag over these little spots here and make my edits like this. And I can also go back to the basic panel and maybe adjust the temperature a bit and add more warm colors to the image, and then even a bit more clarity to the image like this. Let's just see before our basic tab edits and after the basic edits. So we could quickly restore this image and made a much better image. In Bridge, if you press space, you can have a full screen preview, which is also a useful option. We can still straighten this photograph, but I don't want to spend more time on it. Let's just go to the next example with this bird. I just double click on it. This is the only photograph in this tutorial which is not made by me. It's from a famous Hungarian nature photographer, Imre Tamás. And the main reason I use this example is to show you how to reduce noise in a photograph. So you can see here, if I zoom even further, in the background we can easily see the noise, which is mainly caused because of the high ISO value on this photograph. So you can see ISO 800. And if I go to the detail tab, I can increase luminance noise reduction and just have a look at the image, and you can see before and after. So we could completely get rid of the noise, but still we have really nice sharp details on the image or on the bird. Okay, that's something that is really difficult to do in Photoshop, but it's really easy to do here in Camera Raw. And I just would like to show you that I reduced the color noise reduction now, and this is without using color noise reduction, and this is with using color noise reduction. So that's not only luminance noise, but there's also usually color noise in images with high ISO ratings. So, but the color noise reduction is something that is automatically set to 25. So maybe you don't even need to make changes with that. You just need to add luminance noise reduction most of the time. Now, if I zoom out and I zoom again closer to the bottom of the image, here again, let's just see before and after. Maybe zoom a little bit even further. So see the noise in the background. And if I remove the noise, I still have sharp details where I need them. So that's a great thing with Camera Raw. And let me show you another thing that you can do. Instead of removing the noise, you can even add noise or grain to an image. If you want to do something like a vintage looking photograph, you can do that. Let me just first crop this image out. I would like to use this part of the photograph, maybe a little bit more on the top, so something like this. And then I can go to the HSL panel and convert the image to grayscale, then go to split toning and adding a hue for the shadows and the highlights. So I'm looking for something like a sepia color, sepia effect, something like this. But even though we have the sepia effect, we still have a very digital look on this image, but we can solve that by using the effects panel and increasing grain. If I increase grain, you can see that it looks now like an old photograph. But if we also use the vignetting, the post-crop vignetting, and increasing the amount of that one, we can add also that burnt out edges, and we can play a bit with the midpoint and roundness, and we have that old photograph effect like this. And we can click on done to accept these changes. And I would like to show you also something which is very useful, that you can copy and paste settings here in Bridge. So you can copy the Camera Raw settings from one image by right clicking on it, choosing develop settings and choosing copy settings. And then if I want to use the same thing on another image, I just simply need to select the other image, maybe this one for example, and then right click and choose develop paste settings. Here we can choose which options do we need to copy. I just use all of them and I click on OK. And you can see now we have exactly the same settings used on this other photograph. Let me just show you one more edit. I just open this image up and I show you the usual workflow that I go through. I usually start with fill light and recovery, increasing both of them. Then I compensate the exposure. If the image is overexposed, I just move the exposure down a bit, or if it's underexposed, then I move it up. And I can always compensate with fill light. Even you can use brightness to compensate a bit the image. I add a bit more clarity and vibrance to the image, maybe also increase a bit of the temperature just to add more colors, warm colors to the image. Okay, reduce exposure a bit more. So now I see, check with preview, this was before and this is after. And maybe I can add one more last touch, change to the image. I go to the effects panel and I reduce post-crop vignetting just to darken the edges as well. So this is without and with the post-crop vignetting. So as you can see, we could easily turn an originally good composition into an even better photograph by just making quick edits here in Camera Raw. And I click on done. And I would like to show you what happens if you select more images at the same time. So let's just say this is a series that we took at the same place with similar camera options, and I open them all in Camera Raw by using Command R or just simply double clicking on one of them, and I select the first image and I make my edits on that one. I increase the temperature, I increase fill light a bit, recovery also, and I just reduce exposure a bit on this image. So something like this, maybe a bit of clarity and a bit of brightness, something like this. Let's see before and after. Looks much more natural, much better, all the colors and the details. And then I select all the images here on the left and then I click on synchronize and OK. It will synchronize all my changes, so we can see again the other image before and after. We just simply copy and pasted the options that we used on the first one. And here's an image where I used a bit different settings, so it's even more overexposed than the other images. So here I just compensate a bit and add a bit of more darker details by reducing the exposure a bit more. So you can see that using Camera Raw is a very streamlined process to develop your images. And all your changes, just bear in mind, all your changes are completely non-destructive. Maybe one more thing that I would like to show, it's called local adjustment or the adjustment brush. Let me just go back to this image. And if I want to add a bit more light on her face, we can do that by using the adjustment brush tool. And with the adjustment brush, you can again use these settings here on the right, what you would like to use together with the brush. In this case, I would like to add a bit of brightness to the image, just very slightly, and exposure. And I draw over the shadow side, the side of the face in shadow, to add a bit of light there. It's better to do this when you shoot, when you take the photograph, using a reflector to just fill light into the shadow areas, but we can always do that later on. If we haven't had the reflector with us, we can always do that later on using the adjustment brush. And if you hover over that little cursor, it will show you which are the parts where we used it. And as you can see, it automatically used a mask, so it didn't make changes on the eyes and on the lips and on the hair, because the auto mask option was turned on. So we can see before and after. So our changes are mainly on the skin. So that's also an amazing thing. You don't need to do any selections or masks. It works automatically, exactly the way we want it to work. Okay. So that's also another great tool that you can use with Camera Raw. And there are so much more to Camera Raw. This tutorial is mainly to show you the advantages of working with RAW files to JPEG files, and to see what you can easily and quickly achieve working in Camera Raw editing mode. And I highly recommend to use Bridge together with Camera Raw files, because in Bridge it's really simple to see all your edits, to go back to the defaults, to copy settings, and to do most of the things that you need. But if you are a photographer, I also recommend Adobe Photoshop Lightroom, which is very similar to using Bridge together with Adobe Camera Raw. But in Lightroom, you also have the advantage of using a catalog for all your images. Just one more last tip: if you are using Bridge, you can select all the images, and to see all of them, to have a nice preview of them, you can use the review option, Command or Control B, and then you can use right and left arrows to go through all the images that we edited here in Adobe Camera Raw. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope I inspired and motivated you to start using Camera Raw, or even I showed some useful tips for those who already been using Camera Raw. So it's your turn now to explore all the advantages of Adobe Camera Raw. I'm glad you joined me today, and I hope we will meet soon again here on PSD Tuts Plus.